Keanu Reeves made Sandra Bullock's birthday truly unforgettable. The evening began with something unexpected. Sandra Bullock sat quietly in her home, staring at the flickering light of a single candle placed on a small cake she had bought for herself. She smiled softly, but inside her heart felt heavy. Birthdays had always been special to her when she was younger, surrounded by friends and laughter. But now, as she grew older, the noise of the world felt quieter. Many people remembered her name, her movies, her face on screens, yet very few remembered her heart, her silence, her quiet wishes. She whispered to herself, "Happy birthday, Sandra," and blew out the candle. Just then her phone buzzed. A simple message appeared on the screen. "Are you home, Keanu?" Her lips curved into a smile. She hadn't seen Keanu Reeves for months, yet somehow he always seemed to appear at the right moment. She quickly typed back, "Yes, why?" There was no reply for a while. She sat wondering, her thoughts circling like restless birds. Why would he ask so suddenly? What could he be planning? 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Sandra walked to the door, her heart racing with curiosity. When she opened it, there stood Keanu, holding nothing but a small paper bag from a local bakery and a bunch of wildflowers tied together with a simple string. His clothes were plain, his hair slightly messy, but his eyes carried that calm kindness she had always admired. "Happy birthday," he said quietly, his voice soft, yet strong enough to melt the silence between them. Sandra laughed, though her eyes began to water. "You remembered?" "Of course," Keanu replied. "Some things are not to be forgotten." They sat together in her living room, sharing the small cake from the bakery. It wasn't a grand celebration, there were no flashing lights or loud cheers, but it was real, it was pure. Keanu listened to her stories, her worries, her quiet dreams. He didn't try to solve everything. He simply listened. And that made her feel lighter, as if the weight of loneliness had been lifted, if only for a while. But then something surprising happened. Keanu pulled out a small envelope from his jacket. "I wanted to give you this," he said. Sandra looked puzzled, slowly opening the envelope. Inside was a simple note written in his neat handwriting. "One day, one journey, one memory you will never forget." She frowned slightly. "What does this mean?" Keanu smiled but didn't answer. "You'll see tomorrow, trust me." That night, Sandra couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed his words again and again. What could he mean by a journey? What memory was he planning to give her? She felt both excitement and fear. Keanu was unpredictable, yet always thoughtful. He had a way of turning ordinary days into extraordinary ones. The next morning, just as the sun began to rise, she heard a knock again. Keanu stood at her door with two backpacks, a thermos of coffee, and the same calm smile. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready for what?" Sandra replied, still half asleep. "For your birthday adventure," he said. She laughed nervously. "Keanu, I don't even know where we're going." "That's the point," he answered. "Sometimes the best gifts are surprises, trust me." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. After all, it was Keanu. If she trusted anyone, it was him. She grabbed her coat, locked the door behind her, and followed him into the cool morning air. What Sandra didn't know was that Keanu had carefully planned every step of the day, not with luxury or extravagance, but with meaning. He knew she didn't need more fame, more gifts, or more noise. She needed something real. Something that would remind her that even in silence, life could still surprise her, life could still hold magic. As they walked to his car, Sandra asked softly, "Where are we going first?" Keanu smiled again, eyes shining with quiet mischief. "You'll see." And with that, the engine started and their journey began. The road stretched endlessly ahead of them, the early morning sun painting soft gold across the horizon. Sandra leaned her head against the window, her thoughts tangled in curiosity and wonder. She glanced at Keanu, who drove with quiet focus, his hands steady on the wheel. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was filled with unspoken questions and the warmth of a friendship that had endured years, distance, and silence. Still, she couldn't stop herself from asking again. "Keanu, where are we going?" Her voice carried a mix of laughter and impatience. He smiled, his eyes never leaving the road. "If I told you now, it wouldn't be the same. Sometimes the unknown gives the gift more power." She sighed dramatically, pretending to be annoyed, though in her heart she felt a spark she hadn't felt in a long time. It was the spark of adventure, of not knowing what waited ahead. She thought about how her life had become so predictable: schedules, interviews, film sets, rehearsals, endless cycles of responsibility. This sudden trip felt like a doorway out of that routine, a reminder that surprises still existed, that she was still allowed to feel wonder. An hour later, Keanu pulled the car into a quiet roadside stop near a forest trail. Tall trees reached into the sky, their leaves whispering with the soft morning breeze. Sandra looked around in confusion. "Are we hiking?" she asked. "Not just hiking," Keanu replied, opening the trunk to hand her one of the backpacks. "We're chasing the sunrise." She raised an eyebrow. "The sunrise? Didn't we already see it while driving?" He shook his head gently. "Not like this. Trust me, it will be different." They began their climb up the trail. At first, the path was easy, but soon the slope became steeper, and Sandra's breath grew heavier. She stopped for a moment, placing her hands on her knees. "You're trying to kill me on my birthday, aren't you?" she teased. Keanu laughed, handing her the thermos of coffee. "No, I'm trying to remind you how strong you still are. Every step is proof." His words sank deeper than she expected. She had often doubted herself in recent years, wondering if she still had the same strength, the same spark she once carried when she was younger. But hearing those words from him made her feel seen, understood. Finally, after what felt like forever, they reached the top of the hill. Sandra gasped as her eyes widened. Before them stretched a view so breathtaking it silenced every thought in her mind. The sky was painted in shades of pink, orange, and gold, with the rising sun spilling its light across valleys and rivers far below. The world looked endless, alive, and full of possibility. She turned to Keanu, her eyes glistening. "This is beautiful," he nodded, but his gaze was fixed not on the sky but on her. "Sometimes the best way to celebrate life is to remember its beauty. We get so lost in schedules and people's expectations that we forget to just look." Sandra felt a lump rise in her throat. She wanted to speak, but words felt too small for the moment. Instead, she simply sat down on a rock, staring at the horizon. Keanu sat beside her, quiet and steady, as if the silence itself was the gift he wanted to give. But then something unexpected happened. From his backpack, Keanu pulled out a small, worn notebook. The leather cover looked old, like it had traveled many places. He handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, carefully opening the cover. Inside, she found pages filled with notes, sketches, and short pieces of writing. Some were little poems, some were fragments of thoughts, and others were quotes about resilience, kindness, and humility. "This is yours," she whispered. Keanu nodded. "I've been writing in it for years. Whenever I travel, whenever I feel something I can't say out loud, I write it here. I thought maybe, for your birthday, I could share it with you. Not as a gift to keep, but as a gift to see me, not the actor, not the image people talk about, but me." Sandra's chest tightened with emotion. She flipped through the pages slowly, her hands trembling as she read his words. There was so much depth, so much honesty in the notebook. She felt as if she was being let into a part of him no one else had seen. "Why me?" she asked softly, her voice breaking. Keanu looked at her with gentle eyes. "Because you've always listened, you've always seen me for who I am, and that is rare." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away quickly, embarrassed, but Keanu simply placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. They sat in silence, the notebook resting on her lap, as the sun climbed higher into the sky. Just when she thought the moment had reached its deepest point, Keanu stood and extended his hand. "We're not done yet. This was only the beginning." "The beginning?" she asked, still emotional. He nodded. "There are more places I want to take you today, but you'll have to trust me again." Sandra took his hand, feeling both nervous and curious. As they walked back down the trail, she couldn't help but wonder what else he had planned. Was it another breathtaking view, a place from their past, or something even more personal? Her heart raced, not from the hike, but from the suspense of the unknown. And for the first time in years, Sandra felt alive in a way she hadn't felt before, like she was stepping into a story she didn't yet know the ending of. The car rolled back onto the open road, the sound of tires humming like a steady rhythm against the silence. Sandra sat in the passenger seat, still holding the notebook against her chest. Her fingers brushed the worn leather as if it were fragile glass. Her mind was full of questions she didn't dare to ask. Where else could he be taking her? Why had he chosen today of all days to share such an intimate part of himself? Keanu glanced at her and gave a small smile, the kind that revealed nothing but promised everything. "Hungry?" he asked. She laughed softly. "After that hike. Starving?" He nodded and took a sudden turn off the highway, guiding the car down a narrow country road lined with old wooden fences and wide open fields. After a few minutes, they arrived at a small roadside diner, the kind of place that looked like it hadn't changed in decades. Its sign buzzed faintly with neon light, and the smell of coffee and fresh pancakes drifted into the parking lot. "Here?" Sandra asked, raising an eyebrow. "Trust me," he said again, opening her door. They stepped inside, and almost instantly, the chatter of locals filled the room. Old men sipped coffee at the counter. Families shared breakfast in worn-out booths. and a jukebox in the corner hummed with a soft, nostalgic tune. It was far from glamorous, far from Hollywood, but Sandra felt something strangely comforting about it. A waitress in her 50s walked up, her smile genuine. "You two just passing through?" she asked. Keanu nodded politely. "Yes, and we'd love 2 of your specials, please." As they waited for their food, Sandra leaned forward. "So this is part 2 of my birthday adventure. Pancakes and coffee in a place no one would expect to find you?" Keanu chuckled. "Exactly. Sometimes the best moments happen in places where nobody is watching. Here, no cameras, no questions, just real people." His words made her pause. She realized how much of her life had been lived under the weight of being seen, judged, and remembered for roles rather than reality. Here, in this diner, she was just a woman having breakfast with a friend. No spotlight, no expectations. The food arrived, pancakes stacked high, golden butter melting on top, and coffee steaming in chipped mugs. Sandra took her first bite and laughed. "This is better than any fancy restaurant." "I told you," Keanu replied, his eyes twinkling. But then something unexpected happened. An elderly man sitting at the counter suddenly turned around. His face was lined with years, his eyes sharp yet kind. He looked directly at Sandra. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I don't want to bother you, but are you who I think you are?" Sandra froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. She had grown used to being recognized, but something in the man's tone felt different. Not the excitement of a fan, but the reverence of someone who carried a story. "Yes," she said gently. "I'm Sandra." The man nodded, his voice trembling slightly. "My wife, she loved your movies. She passed away last year, but on her last birthday, we watched one of your films together. She said it made her feel alive again, even for just a few hours. Thank you." Tears pricked at the corners of Sandra's eyes. She stood up without hesitation and walked over to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered. "That means more than you know." The entire diner seemed to grow quieter, the moment wrapping everyone in its tender silence. Keanu watched, his expression soft, as Sandra sat beside the man for a few minutes, listening to him share small memories of his wife. When she finally returned to their booth, Sandra's hands trembled slightly. She looked at Keanu and whispered, This is why today feels different. It's not just about me, it's about connection." Keanu nodded slowly. "Exactly. Birthdays aren't just about celebrating ourselves. They're about remembering the lives we touch along the way." They finished their breakfast, the atmosphere heavy with both sorrow and warmth. As they stepped back outside, the world felt brighter, as if even the pain they had witnessed inside the diner carried its own quiet beauty. But the day wasn't over. Keanu placed the backpack into the trunk and looked at her with that same mysterious smile. "Are you ready for the next part?" Sandra laughed nervously. "Should I be scared?" "Maybe," he teased, "but I promise it will be unforgettable." They drove for hours, the scenery shifting from open fields to winding mountain roads. Sandra dozed off for a while, lulled by the steady motion of the car, until Keanu gently tapped her shoulder. "We're here," he whispered. She rubbed her eyes and looked out the window. Her breath caught instantly. They were standing at the edge of a vast lake, its surface shimmering like glass under the afternoon sun. Tall pines surrounded the water, and the air smelled fresh and clean. But what drew her attention wasn't just the view. It was the small wooden boat tied to the dock. "We're going out there?" she asked. Keanu nodded, grabbing the oars. "Sometimes, to find peace, you have to go where the world can't reach you." As they rowed into the middle of the lake, the silence grew deeper, almost sacred. The water reflected the sky, making it feel as if they were floating in another world. Sandra closed her eyes, breathing in the stillness, and when she opened them again, she felt something stir inside her, a mix of calm, longing, and gratitude. She turned to Keanu, her voice soft. "Why are you doing all this for me?" He paused, resting the oars across the boat. His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "Because sometimes people give so much of themselves to the world that they forget they deserve to receive too. You've given so much, Sandra. You deserve to be reminded that you are worth celebrating." Her chest ached with emotion. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from the rare gift of being truly seen. And yet, even in that still moment, she knew Keanu was holding something back, something he hadn't told her yet. His eyes carried a secret, one that waited just beyond the horizon of this birthday journey. She didn't press him, not yet. Instead, she let the boat drift gently, trusting that whatever came next would reveal itself in its own time. The boat rocked gently on the lake, the stillness of the water surrounding them like a protective blanket. Sandra sat in silence, her heart heavy but strangely light at the same time. She could feel Keanu watching her, not in the way most people looked at her, with expectation, with judgment, with curiosity, but with a quiet respect as if her very presence was enough. For a while, neither of them spoke. The sound of birds calling from the trees and the soft splash of water against the wooden boat filled the air. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. "You've gone to so much trouble for me," she whispered. "But I still don't understand why now, why this year?" Keanu didn't answer immediately. He leaned back, his eyes scanning the horizon as though searching for words in the shifting light. After a long pause, he said, "Because sometimes birthdays remind us how fast time is moving. We think we have forever, but we don't. I didn't want another year to pass without reminding you how important you are." Sandra swallowed hard. His words touched something deep inside her, a wound she rarely allowed herself to feel. She thought about her own loneliness, the empty nights when she wondered if anyone truly saw her beyond her image. But before she could reply, Keanu's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He glanced at it quickly, his expression tightening. Sandra noticed the shift instantly. "Who was that?" she asked gently. Keanu slipped the phone back without answering. "Nobody important." But his eyes betrayed him. They carried a weight, a burden she hadn't seen earlier. "Keanu," she pressed softly, "you can tell me." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Not yet. Today is about you. I don't want to cloud it with my shadows." Her heart ached at his words. She wanted to push, to demand answers, but she also knew him well enough to understand that when he was ready, he would share. So instead, she placed her hand over his, offering quiet support. The moment passed and Keanu rowed them back to shore. But in Sandra's mind, questions grew louder. What was he hiding? What truth was he protecting her from? Once they returned to the car, Keanu surprised her again. He handed her a blindfold. "What's this for?" She laughed nervously. "The next stop," he said. "You can't see until we get there, trust me." She rolled her eyes but tied the blindfold around her head. Sitting in darkness, she felt her heart race. Every turn of the car made her wonder where they were going. The suspense was maddening but also thrilling. She hadn't felt this alive in years. Finally, the car stopped. Keanu helped her out, guiding her carefully with his hands. "Just a few more steps," he whispered. When he removed the blindfold, Sandra gasped. Before her stood a small wooden cabin hidden among towering pines. Smoke curled gently from the chimney and the scent of burning wood filled the air. It was quiet, peaceful, untouched by the world outside. "What is this place?" she asked in awe. "A place I come to when the world feels too loud," Keanu explained. "I thought you might need it too." They stepped inside and Sandra's breath caught again. The cabin was simple but warm. Shelves filled with books lined the walls, and a fire crackled in the stone fireplace. A guitar leaned against the corner, and a few framed photographs rested on a small wooden table, images of landscapes, sunsets, and quiet moments frozen in time. "You did all this?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I've been coming here for years. It's where I remember who I am." Sandra walked slowly around the room, her fingers brushing the spines of the books. She felt an overwhelming sense of calm, as if the weight she had been carrying had finally loosened. "This place, it's beautiful," she whispered. Keanu sat near the fire, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Sometimes we need to step away from everything, even just for a day, to remember what matters. I wanted you to have that today." She sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. The warmth of the fire and the stillness of the cabin wrapped around them like a cocoon. After a long silence, Sandra turned to him. "Keanu, I need to ask you something. This day has been amazing, but there's something in your eyes, something you're not telling me. What is it?" Keanu's jaw tightened. He stared into the flames for a long time before finally speaking. "I didn't want to bring this up today, but maybe I owe you the truth. There's something I've been carrying, something I've never told anyone." Sandra's heart pounded in her chest. She leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "What is it?" He turned his eyes toward her, the firelight reflecting in their depths. "It's about loss and about why I've been planning this day for months. I needed you to know before it's too late." The room fell silent. The fire crackled, the night pressed in from outside, and Sandra's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the weight of his words, the gravity of a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. But she also knew this was the moment everything would change. The fire crackled softly in the cabin, each spark floating into the air like a fleeting memory. Sandra sat frozen, her breath caught in her chest, her eyes fixed on Keanu. She had known him for years, but in this moment, he felt like a stranger holding a secret so heavy it could change everything. Keanu stared into the flames, his jaw tense, his hands clasped together. The silence stretched until it was almost unbearable. Finally, in a low voice, he spoke. Sandra, I've lived with loss for a long time. You know parts of my story, the pain I've carried? But what I haven't told you is how much it still shapes me. Every year when birthdays come, I think about how fragile time is, how quickly it slips away. His words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Sandra's throat tightened. She wanted to reach for his hand, but hesitated, afraid to interrupt what was spilling out of him. He continued, his voice steady but laced with sorrow. I've lost people I love deeply. I've watched moments vanish before I had the chance to hold on to them. And for so long, I told myself it was easier to live quietly, to stay in the shadows, to not risk more pain. He finally looked at her, his eyes glistening in the firelight. But when I thought about you, about this birthday, I realized something. Sometimes we let fear of loss keep us from giving. And I don't want to live that way anymore. Sandra's chest ached with emotion. She whispered, Keanu, why are you telling me this now? He leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. Because I don't want another year to pass without reminding you that you matter. Not just to the world, not just to your fans, but to me. I needed you to know before it's too late. Her heart raced. Too late? What do you mean? He hesitated, then admitted quietly, I've been dealing with something with my health. Nothing dramatic yet, but enough to remind me that time is not promised. That's why I wanted to give you this day. To remind both of us that life isn't about how long we have, but how deeply we live it. Sandra's breath broke into a sob. She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. Why didn't you tell me sooner? You've been carrying this alone. He nodded. I didn't want pity. I didn't want to be defined by it. I wanted at least one day where life felt full, and I wanted that day to be yours. Her tears fell freely now, but there was no shame in them. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice trembling. You gave me more than a birthday. You gave me a reminder that I'm not alone. And you don't have to be alone either, Keanu. Not anymore. They sat in silence, the fire warming their faces, their hearts beating with unspoken promises. But then, just as the weight of his confession began to settle, Keanu reached into his jacket pocket once more. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper and handed it to her. Sandra unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the words. It wasn't just another note. It was a letter, written in his careful handwriting. Dear Sandra, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to say what I've held back for years. Our paths have crossed so many times, and each time I've been reminded of your strength, your light, and your kindness. This birthday isn't just about giving you memories. It's about finally giving you the truth. I've cared for you far more deeply than I've ever admitted, and if life has taught me anything, it's that we can't keep love hidden forever. Sandra's hands trembled as she held the letter. Her eyes blurred with tears, but her heart raced with something beyond sorrow, something brighter, more alive. She looked up at him, her lips parting, but no words came out. Keanu watched her quietly, his expression open, vulnerable. I didn't want to let another birthday go by without telling you, he said softly. The cabin felt smaller now, filled with a truth too big to contain. Sandra pressed the letter against her chest, closing her eyes for a moment as if to let the words sink into her very soul. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper. All this time. You've been carrying that? All this time, he admitted. She took his hand again, firmer this time, as if anchoring both of them against the storm of emotions. Then let's not waste any more of it, she said. Outside, the wind howled gently through the trees, carrying with it the sound of something breaking and something healing at the same time. Yet deep in Sandra's heart, she knew this was not the end of the journey. It was only the beginning of something far greater, something that would test them both. Because love, like life, carried its own risks and its own resilience. And as the fire flickered lower, Sandra realized that this birthday would not just be unforgettable, it would change everything. The night in the cabin deepened, the fire burning lower as shadows danced across the wooden walls. Sandra sat close to Keanu, her heart pounding with every unspoken thought. She had read his letter again and again, her hands trembling each time her eyes traced the words. It wasn't just his confession of love, it was his honesty, his vulnerability, and the weight of his truth about time slipping away. For years, she had kept her feelings buried too, hidden beneath the noise of fame and the chaos of life. But in this quiet place, stripped of everything except raw emotion, she could no longer keep silent. She turned to him, her eyes shimmering with both fear and certainty. "Keanu, I need you to hear this. I've cared about you too, more than I ever let myself admit. I told myself it was easier to just keep it inside. But now I see what you're saying. Time isn't something we can store away. It's something we have to live. And I don't want to waste another second." Keanu's lips parted slightly, his usually calm expression breaking into something more fragile, more alive. "Sandra," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Before either of them could overthink, she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. Their silence spoke louder than words, their closeness a language of its own. And then slowly, they kissed. Soft at first, then with the quiet urgency of two people who had been waiting far too long. When they finally pulled apart, Sandra laughed through her tears. "You've made this the most unforgettable birthday of my life." Keanu smiled faintly. That was the plan. They stayed by the fire until it was only embers, speaking softly about memories, regrets, and dreams they had never shared with anyone else. For the first time, Sandra felt seen. Not as the actress, not as the public figure, but simply as a woman who longed for connection. And Keanu, who had carried loss like an invisible weight, finally allowed himself to feel something beyond grief. The next morning, light poured through the cabin windows. Sandra awoke to the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of Keanu quietly humming as he prepared breakfast. It was simple: eggs, toast, and coffee in mismatched mugs. But to her, it felt like a feast. "Happy day after your birthday," he said with a grin. She chuckled, shaking her head. "Is this part of the plan too?" "No," he admitted. "This is just me, wanting to make you breakfast." They ate together, laughter slipping easily between them. For once, there was no rush, no schedule, no cameras waiting outside. Only two people rediscovering the beauty of simplicity. After breakfast, Keanu suggested one final stop. They packed their bags and drove back into the city, but instead of taking her home, he guided her to a small community center. "What are we doing here?" Sandra asked, puzzled. Keanu's eyes softened. "I wanted to end your birthday the way I think you'd want it, by giving something back." Inside, children were gathered in a brightly lit room, painting, playing music, and laughing. Volunteers moved around helping them, and when the kids saw Sandra and Keanu walk in, their faces lit up with joy. The two of them spent hours there, reading stories, helping paint, and simply being present. Sandra knelt beside a little girl who proudly showed her a drawing of a sunrise. "It's beautiful," Sandra said, her voice catching. The girl grinned. "It's the sun giving us another chance every day." The words struck Sandra deeply, echoing everything Keanu had reminded her of. Life wasn't about holding on to time. It was about making each moment count. As the sun began to set outside, Sandra and Keanu walked out of the center, their hearts full. She turned to him, tears shining in her eyes, but her smile bright. "This wasn't just unforgettable, Keanu. This changed me. I'll never look at time the same way again." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "Then my mission is complete." She shook her head. "No, it's just beginning. Because now we have to promise each other, no more hiding, no more waiting. Whatever time we have, we live it fully. Together." Keanu's smile grew, soft and true. "Together," he repeated. They stood side by side as the sky glowed in brilliant shades of orange and gold, the same colors that had greeted them at the top of the hill the morning before. But this time, the view wasn't just of a sunrise or a sunset, it was of a future they had finally allowed themselves to see. And as the day faded into night, Sandra knew this birthday wasn't just unforgettable. It was the beginning of a new story, one written not with scripts or cameras, but with truth, kindness, resilience, and love.